I believe we can start. Can we? Looking at the back already. Thank you very much. So let's start this afternoon. Minister Starovic, Ambassador von Bekerat, representatives of the Serbian ministries, state authorities, and business operators, esteemed colleagues from the diplomatic community, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and welcome to our Europe House, to Vaša Evropska kuća. My name is Manuel Munteanu. I'm head of press and information at the EU delegation to the Republic of Serbia. I'm honored to welcome you to the presentation of the European Commission's 2025 annual report on Serbia to the business community. Thank you all for joining us today, both live in this conference hall as well as online at our YouTube channel. We are here today to discuss the finding of the European Commission's 2025 annual report on Serbia, in particular its economic aspects. This event brings today key leaders, government representatives, experts, business executives to exchange views on the growth and development potential, challenges and opportunities that the EU accession process holds for Serbia. We are pleased, therefore, to have with us distinguished speakers and panelists who will share their perspectives on how Serbia can leverage its journey for sustained economic growth for the benefit of its citizens. It is therefore my distinct pleasure to first announce Mr. Andreas von Bekerat, EU Ambassador to Serbia, to deliver his keynote address and share with you the key findings of this year's report on Serbia. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Manuel. Minister Starovic, Dernemanja, dear representatives of the business community, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, warmly welcome to Europe House. I always call it my second home, and it's really nice to have you here today. This is sort of part of a pretty long tour of different presentations I've made of this year's annual report. But I believe that this presentation is particularly important because it's a chance for us to hear the comments and views of the business community. It's sort of our findings, which we believe are fact-based and objective, will now meet the business reality. And that for us is very, very important. So thank you so much for coming here today. I thought, well, what I would do would be to divide my address into three different parts. First, I would say a few things about the general enlargement process and about the importance of enlargement, the fact that it's really a top priority for the European Union. And secondly, go into more in details about the key findings of the report. Some of the positive progress and quite a few areas where we hope to see further progress. And then thirdly, go into more in depth when it comes to the economic parts of the report, which we believe would be of particular interest to the business community. So let me start by saying what you already know, namely that enlargement is really a political priority. And we always say that it's a geopolitical investment in a strong, stable, secure, and united Europe based on democratic values. I sometimes get the question, is enlargement, Serbia's EU accession, is it what's more important, the values or EU's interests? And I'm always surprised to hear that question because I don't see there's a contradiction between interests and values because our values are our interests. So basically it's important for us to see our neighborhood being stable, secure, and based on democratic values. That is ultimately our interest. I think it's fair to say that investing in enlargement is also in the EU's long-term economic interest, not least in today's very geopolitical and geoeconomic world. It's very important that the EU continues to be a strong player on the world stage. And the chance to enlarge the Union doesn't come very often, but it's here now. There is a concrete momentum right now for enlargement. And that's why we're very much hoping that Serbia would also seize this opportunity that exists right now. And I think we've seen the fact that there is momentum in the quite impressive progress made by some candidate countries. At the same time, we will not cut any corners. There will be no geopolitical rebates. There will not be any shortcuts. The EU accession process remains built on facts and merits. If we look at this year's overall enlargement report, I think it's fair to say that it was a good year for enlargement. The scorecards are largely positive for Albania, Moldova, Montenegro, and Ukraine. And this shows that reforms really pays off. The outlook is rather mixed for Serbia, North Macedonia, Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Turkey. And for Georgia, unfortunately, it has been a negative scorecard. When it comes to the core findings of this year's annual report, I think sort of a key sentence is that there has been a slowdown of the reform pace since last year. And the report very much encourages Serbia now to implement credible reforms across the board. The report also notes the turbulent political environment, the increased polarisation in Serbia, which has deepened after the tragic accident in Novi Sad last year and following large-scale protests. It also reflects on the instances of what we believe to have been excessive use of force and also pressure against civil society. But I think the key part of this chapter of the report is the importance now to tone down the rhetoric and to try to bridge this polarization and to make space for compromise and dialogue. When it comes to some of the positive developments, it notes that Serbia has amended its media legislation, bringing it closer to EU legislation. And it also notes the recent positive developments when it comes to the unified voter register. Amendments to the law were adopted last week, and also the progress that we've seen when it comes to the Dem Council. And what's significant for both of these processes is that they are inclusive, involving stakeholders both from the ruling coalition, but also from civil society and opposition. Now, it reiterates also the importance of implementing these reforms. We always come back to that the accession process is not about ticking boxes. The reforms needs to be genuinely implemented and lead to concrete change. Only then can they be assessed as real progress. We have also noted that Serbia's alignment with the common foreign and security policy has somewhat increased. It's not entirely reflected in the report because there was a cutoff date early in October. But we also acknowledge the need for stronger alignment with the common foreign and security policy. It's important to remind everyone that the European Union is not only a union of trade and economic cooperation, it's also about security and foreign policy cooperation. And we basically need to know that Serbia has our back. And also positive, on the positive front, the report once again reiterates that technical conditions for opening Cluster 3 is in place. And now it's up to the member states to decide on whether or not to open Cluster 3. When it comes to the area where we believe that more work is needed, the report notes that there has been a standstill in the judiciary when it comes to fundamental rights, basically within the fundamentals. So rule of law, respect for human rights, media freedom, freedom of expression. And concerning freedom of expression, the report notes that there has been backsliding, so a negative trend. And it also notes with concern the erosion of academic freedom. It also highlights the importance to continue with electoral reforms. I mentioned the unified voter register. Now it's important to continue with other OD recommendations after the last parliamentary election. It also stresses the need to create an enabling environment for both media and civil society. And it also highlights the importance to have a more proactive and positive communication when it comes to the EU path and the EU accession. I said that several times throughout the past week that this is not about the EU being sensitive to criticism. I think there are few organizations that are more used to being criticized than the EU, including by its member states. So it's not that, and I'm ready, and my colleagues are ready to anytime have a serious discussion on what we believe to be the overwhelming benefits for Serbia of joining the European Union, both becoming a member, but also the benefits that will be rewarded along the path during the accession process. But what I take issue with and what I have no time with is disinformation and reporting on the EU which is not based on facts. And I mentioned several examples of this throughout the past couple of weeks since my arrival, that it's really becoming a problem that media often basically spreading lies when it comes to the EU accession process. So this needs to be dealt with. And obviously also important for us that government officials and authorities are proactively spreading the gospel of the benefits when it comes to EU accession. And again, it mentions the importance of making progress when it comes to the EU-facilitated dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. It notes that domestic political preoccupation on both sides have hindered the decisive steps towards implementing the 2023 agreement on the path to normalization. When it comes to the economic areas, it's one of the areas where we've seen the most progress. I think overall, and I don't need to tell you that, but if you look overall, Serbia's economic strength throughout the past couple of years has been quite strong, quite good. In 2024, we saw 3.9% GDP growth, but it has slowed down in the first half of 2025 to just 2%. FDIs has sustained growth with a strong performance in 2024, 5.6% of GDP, but fell by over half in the first 6 months of 2025 compared to the same period in 2024. The report notes that the state still plays a major role in the economy, which tends sometimes to hamper competition and the development of the private sector. It also notes the importance that state-owned enterprises continue to have an outsized presence in many structurally important sectors, employing a large share of the workforce. They hamper competitiveness while also posing a major risk for public finance. and Serbia is therefore expected to implementing legislation to fully implement the state-owned enterprise law and to strengthen the state-owned enterprise governance in order to reduce the associated fiscal risks. Despite the progress in reducing the regulatory and administrative burden of business, the business environment remains hindered by red tape, political interference, weakness in the rule of law, and limited efficiency and transparency of the public administration. It also notes the introduction of a 20% retail margin cap, which was introduced for a wide variety of goods 1st of September this year for the following 6 months. And while it is intended to benefit consumers through lower inflation, this measure risks causing significant market distortion and having a negative impact on investments. And in addition, the measure will generate significant losses for retailers and could also lead to stores closing and people being laid off. On the second economic criteria, the capacity to cope with competitive pressure and market forces within the Union, Serbia is between a moderate and a good level of preparation and has made some progress. The manufacturing and service sectors are well developed, benefiting from close economic integration with the EU. And a few points to highlight here. As you might already know, but just to remind you that the EU has for more than 2 decades been Serbia's most important trading partner, accounting for close to 60% of all trade in goods and 45% of Serbia's total trade in services. EU companies are also, as you know, by far Serbia's largest foreign investor, accounting for around 56% of FDIs from 2010 until 2024. And this translates to a stunning total of 24 billion euros worth of investments coming from the EU in the past 15 years. And obviously, as you know, the growth plan also offers a very powerful tool for Serbia when it comes to gradual integration into the single market, but also receiving more financial benefits depending on Serbia's implementation of the reform agenda. The level of government investments in infrastructure is high, concentrated in road and rail infrastructure, but infrastructure gaps still remain. And in this regard, Serbia is expected to further strengthen public investment management by putting in place a single, comprehensive and transparent system for prioritizing and selecting all public investments, regardless of the type and source of financing, and in line with the best international standards. The green transition reforms are progressing, but the pace of reforms is too slow. Energy infrastructure is largely outdated, with coal as the main energy source for Serbia. And Serbia remains highly dependent on Russia for gas and oil, although certain encouraging steps have been taken to diversify the energy import. And these efforts need to be stepped up and accelerated in the months and years to come. Digital transformation is well advanced. Digital connectivity infrastructure is well developed in urban areas, but underdeveloped in rural areas. And digital government services are well developed. SMEs, like for many countries, it's sort of the backbone of Serbia's economy. It provides 60% of employment and turnover in the economy, as well as 50% of the added value. It still faces obstacles in terms of access to finance and uneven playing field compared with large companies and foreign investors. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, just a few points to highlight. First of all, this report, I've said this many times throughout the past week, the intention is not to sort of list different complaints or criticism. It's really to provide to the authorities, the government, but also other stakeholders, what we believe to be blueprint, a roadmap for how to accelerate reforms and make faster progress on the path to EU membership. Enlargement is a strategic choice, and Serbia's commitment must be visible both in decisive actions, consistent reforms, but also a public narrative that reinforces Serbia's EU future. I would also, again, like to stress that enlarging the European Union is a mutual interest. It's good for Serbia, it's good for Serbian citizens, and it's always worth reminding that the reforms we mention in this report, they should not be implemented because the EU is asking for it. They should be implemented because they will improve the daily life of ordinary Serbian citizens. But the enlargement is good for you, but it's also good for the EU. It's a win-win situation. It would make the EU stronger, and it would be a long-term investment in our joint European prosperity. And finally, just to reiterate that Serbia really has the potential to accelerate on the EU path, but it requires genuine political will and strong reforms. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I wish you a very fruitful discussion here today, and I hope that you have really a lot of comments on the report that will help us to support Serbia to accelerate the reform process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your keynote speech. And we have now the pleasure to welcome His Excellency Nemanja Starović, Minister for European Integration, to take the floor and share with us how the government of Serbia reads the finding of this year's report. Minister, the floor is yours, please.
Your Excellency, dear Andreas, poštovane dame I gospodo. Ja ću se obratiti na srpskom jeziku, tako da ostavit ćemo par sekundi kolegama da stave svoje slušalice. Godišnji izveštaj Evropske komisije mi razumemo I prihvatamo kao svojevrstan inventar u kojem je veoma taksativno I detaljno navedeno sa jedne strane sve ono što smo uspeli da postignemo u sklopu naših reformskih procesa u prethodnoj godini, sa druge strane u izveštaju se navodi I sve ono gde nismo bili možda dovoljno uspešni I efikasni, ali sa treće on predstavlja I spisak izazova koji se još uvek pred nama nalaze. I nije nikakva tajna da mi ne možemo biti u potpunosti srećni I zadovoljni svim formulacijama koje se u godišnjem izveštaju nalaze, a pogotovo nekim stvarima kojih u godišnjem izveštaju nema, a verujemo da bi im tu zapravo bilo mesto. No, sve to skupa zapravo u ovom momentu I nije toliko važno, budući da je izveštaj objavljen I da sada treba da se skoncentrišemo na to kakve će efekte proizvesti. S jedne strane govorimo o efektima na institucije Evropske unije I države članice, a sa druge strane govorimo o efektima koji će uticati dakle na našu orijentaciju I na ono na što ćemo mi biti, dakle kao izvršna vlast u Republici Srbiji I drugi delovi institucije Republike Srbije fokusirani. I naravno da izveštaj kao I svake godine daje dve vrste ocena. On govori o opštem nivou spremnosti svake države kandidata za članstvo u Evropskoj uniji, imajući u vidu da se Republika Srbija nalazi u procesu pristupnih pregovora već 11 godina, kada se sve sabere, a shodno ocenama ovog izveštaja, naša država je I dalje najspremnija odmah iza Crne Gore, a ispred ostalih država kandidata. Druga vrsta ocene koju izveštaj daje jeste šta smo to postigli, koliki smo napredak imali u prethodnih godinu dana, odnosno u periodu koji izveštaj sagledava od septembra 2024. do septembra 2025. I kada uzmemo u obzir tu drugu vrstu ocene, možemo videti da izveštaj Evropske komisije jasno ukazuje na to da je naš tempo reformi u 11 pregovaračkih poglavlja bio brži nego li što je to bilo slučaj prethodne godine. U drugih 11 poglavlja je nivo napretka bio identičan, dok je u preostalih 11 od ukupno 33 koje se analiziraju, on bio nešto sporiji. I ne trošeći puno vremena sa moje strane na sve ono što izveštaj pohvaljuje, a tiče se pre svega, dakle, dobrog ili solidnog napretka u onim pregovaračkim poglavljima koja su povezana sa performansama naših ekonomskih politika, naravno da ću se pre svega usvrnuti na one delove izveštaja koji su kritični. No, pre nego što to kažem, dozvolite mi da ukažem na nešto što je za nas veoma važno, a to je da uprkos različitim najavama koje smo mogli čuti u našoj javnosti u prethodnim nedeljama i mesecima, a pre samog objavljivanja ovog godišnjeg izveštaja za našu državu, i ovaj put Evropska komisija veoma jasno i eksplicitno potvrđuje da je Srbija tehnički spremna za otvaranje pregovaračkog klastera broj 3 i ponavlja preporuku iz prošlogodišnjeg izveštaja da do otvaranja tog klastera konačno dođe. I u tom smislu i ovaj godišnji izveštaj će za nas predstavljati važan alat, važan argument u danima koji su pred nama, da potpomognemo formiranje tog nužnog političkog konsenzusa 27 država članica Evropske unije, koji bi nam omogućio da konačno napravimo taj simbolički važan korak u našem procesu pristupanja Evropskoj uniji, jer verujemo da i države članice treba da uvaže ne samo ono što je Srbija učinila u prethodnoj godini, već kumulativno posmatrano sve što smo učinili u prethodne 4 godine, od kako to zeleno svetlo i pozitivna preporuka Evropske komisije postoji, jer bi u suprotnom bilo veoma teško zadržati punu kredibilnost procesa proširenja, ne samo kada govorimo o javnosti Srbije, već i na jednom širem planu, ukoliko sve reforme provedene u 4 godine iza nas, a podsjetimo se, govorimo i o procesu izmena Ustava Republike Srbije u cilju obezbeđivanja višeg nivoa nezavisnosti pravosuđa i svega ostalog. Ukoliko sve to, dakle, skupa ne vredi jednog simbolički važnog, ali tek jednog od mnogo koraka u nizu koji nas vodi ka članstvu, govorim naravno o otvaranju klastera 3. Godišnji izveštaj Evropske komisije jeste negde najkritičniji kada govorimo o oblasti slobode izražavanja, slobode medija. I to je upravo oblast koju smo posvetili veoma veliku pažnju u mesecima koji su iza nas. Princip po kojem Evropska komisija zapravo ocenjuje uspeh u određenim reformama se svodi na onu formulu da ništa nije završeno dok nije potpuno završeno. I iako prepoznaje veliki napor koji smo učinili upravo u ovom delu, za koji je nadležno regulatorno telo za elektronske medije, govorimo o procesu izbora članova REM-a, u momentu, dakle, kada je izveštaj sačinjavan, mi još uvek nismo imali u potpunosti funkcionalno ovo važno nezavisno telo. I veoma je važno to što smo upravo u danima koji su iza nas, mi konačno priveli kraju te procese i kada govorimo o usvajanju zakona o jedinstvenom biračkom spisku i kada govorimo o izboru, doduše 8 od 9 članova saveta REM-a, jer sada je upravo na tom, ponavljam, veoma važnom, nezavisnom regulatornom telu da na jedan potpuno funkcionalan način krene da sprovodi svoje zakonske nadležnosti i bitno i ključno doprinese unapređenju stanja na našoj medijskoj sceni. Uveren sam da će to biti slučaj. Zato kažem da godišnji izveštaj za nas predstavlja i, među ostalog, i mapu puta, inventar svega onoga gde treba dodatno da posvetimo svoju pažnju u ovom vremenu i verujem da to Vlada Republike Srbije i druge institucije naše države upravo u ovom vremenu i čine. Druga oblast gde postoje kritike, bit ću slobodan da kažem u velikoj meri opravdane, jeste vezano za prilično negativne narative koji na našoj medijskoj sceni, u našoj javnosti postoje vis-a-vis Evropske unije. Nisu oni jedini, naravno, postoje i pozitivni narativi, ali negativno izveštavanje jeste zastupljeno. I ono što verujem da svi možemo da primetimo, da u danima koji su i sedmicama koji su iza nas postoji vidan napredak upravo i u toj oblasti. Sa svoje strane, kao neko ko je na čelu Ministarstva za evropske integracije, mogu da potvrdim i to da smo mi i tekako voljni i spremni da veoma brzo pokrenemo jednu veoma efikasnu, sveobuhvatnu medijsku kampanju, kroz koju bismo pre svega na jedan objektivan način ukazali, prikazali našoj javnosti šta je to sve Srbija i kao država, ali i naše društvo u celini postiglo i dobilo do sada kroz proces pristupanja Evropskoj uniji, koje su to sve konkretne koristi, a ne mislim tu samo na onu direktnu finansijsku pomoć i podršku koja je svakako veoma značajna, već na koji način ta projekcija stabilnosti, predvidivosti je zapravo doprinela ukupnom poboljšanju, dakle privrednom razvoju, ali i unapređenju socijalno-ekonomskog položaja našeg stanovništva i sa druge strane šta je to što nas čeka, dakle, daljim napretkom pa i samim završetkom tog procesa u vidu punopravnog članstva Republike Srbije u Evropskoj uniji. Verujem da dobar deo tih negativnih narativa u našoj javnosti proističe iz nedovoljno dobre informisanosti o samom procesu pristupanja Evropskoj uniji, o njegovoj prirodi, karakteru i o koristima koje i građani i privreda ili već imaju sa jedne strane ili koji ih svakako u budućnosti očekuju. Godišnji izveštaj Evropske komisije za 2025. godinu u Srbiji, objavljen početkom ovog novembra, pruža sveobuhvatan pregled napretka naše zemlje na putu ka članstvu. Izveštaj pažljivo ocenjuje postignuti napredak, ali identifikuje oblasti koje zahtevaju dodatnu pažnju i napor. Srbija na nalaze izveštaja ne gleda samo kao na formalne observacije, već kao na praktičnu mapu puta za konkretne aktivnosti i reforme. Konstruktivne preporuke koje sadrži shvatamo ozbiljno i koristimo ih kao smernice za kreiranje politika i sprovođenje mera potrebnih kako bismo ispunili standarde Evropske unije. U pogledu institucionalnog razvoja i evropske perspektive, izveštaj konstatuje da je Srbija na izvesnom nivou pripremljenosti, odnosno umereno pripremljena u oblastima pravosuđa, vladavine prava i osnovnih prava. Slično, u oblasti reforme javne uprave, Srbija pokazuje umerenu pripremljenost, iako izveštaj navodi da u ovom području tokom izveštajnog perioda nije zabeležen ukupni napredak. Iako su konkretna poboljšanja u demokratskim institucijama prepoznata, potreban je dodatni napredak, naročito kada je reč o izbornom procesu i parlamentarnom nadzoru. Iako su ove oblasti ocenjene lošije, rad na ispunjavanju određenih kriterijuma se uveliko odvija, o čemu svedoči i usvajanje zakona o reviziji biračkog spiska. Ovi nalazi dodatno potvrđuju važnost transparentnosti, učešća građana, jačanja institucionalne odgovornosti kao centralnih stubova naših napora u procesu pristupanja Evropskoj uniji. Izveštaj se dalje bavi vladavinom prava i slobodom medija. Ističe se da je napredak u borbi protiv korupcije bio, ali ograničen. Kada je reč o slobodi izražavanja i nezavisnosti medija, izveštaj ukazuje na mešovitu sliku. Dok je normativni okvir unapređen, praktično okruženje za novinare se u pojedinim aspektima pogoršalo. Srbija prepoznaje potrebu za očuvanjem okruženja u kome novinari mogu da rade slobodno i nezavisno, bez straha i pritisaka, i to su suštinske komponente svake funkcionalne demokratije. U pogledu ekonomije, izveštaj konstatuje da se Srbija nalazi između umerenog i dobrog nivoa pripremljenosti uz određeni napredak ostvaren u više oblasti. Iako su ovi nalazi ohrabrujući, oni istovremeno ukazuju na potrebu za daljim naporima kako bi se unapredila konkurentnost privrede, u potpunosti se integrisali unutrašnje tržište Evropske unije i ispunili očekivanja tog jedinstvenog tržišta. Napredak ka otvaranju klastera 3, konkurentnost i inkluzivni rast, posebno je dobrodošao, jer odražava kontinuiranu posvećenost Srbije jačanju privrednog rasta, unapređenju tržišne konkurentnosti i podsticanju inkluzivnih mogućnosti za privredu i građane. Aktivnosti u klasteru 2, unutrašnje tržište, i klasteru 5, resursi, poljoprivrede i kohezija, takođe potvrđuju posvećenost Srbije sveobuhvatnim reformama i usklađivanju sa standardima Evropske unije. Srbija ostaje čvrsto posvećena svom strateškom cilju, a to je punopravno članstvo u Evropskoj uniji. Svaka preduzeta mera usmerena je ka postizanju opipljivih rezultata, suštinskom ispunjavanju standarda Evropske unije i obezbeđivanju da proces pristupanja odražava onaj stvarni napredak naše države. Izveštaj Evropske komisije služi ne samo kao instrument procene, već i kao dobra prilika. Prilika da ponovo potvrdimo svoju posvećenost, ojačamo partnerstva i pokažemo merljive rezultate u svim oblastima reforme. Srbija ostaje pouzdan i posvećen partner Evropske unije, odlučna da ubrza reforme i ostvari rezultate koji našu zemlju vode ka članstvu. Sa jasnim fokusom na sprovođenje reformi i jačanje institucionalnih kapaciteta, uveren sam da će Srbija u narednom periodu pokazati taj merljiv napredak, doprineti snažnijoj, inkluzivnijoj, potpunosti integrisanoj budućnosti čitavog evropskog kontinenta. Hvala vam puno.
Thank you, Minister. And I would like now to invite our dear colleague from the EU delegation, Mr. Pasquale De Mico, head of the European Integration section at the EU delegation to Serbia, to take the floor to give us a summary of the economic aspects of this year's annual report. Pasquale will highlight key findings on Serbia's economic progress and challenges as outlined in the report. Pasquale, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Ambassador and Minister Starovic, for their presentation. Now we will focus a bit on the economic part of the report, trying to come to some conclusions and some observation that may be useful for companies. The accession process, I'm not going to resume it, happily for you. It's a long and complex process where there is a peculiarity compared to other international processes that we have in the European Union. It steers at unanimity. This is not what you have in trade policy. In trade policy, if you negotiate a free trade agreement, and I've been negotiating the free trade agreements with the United States, with Latin America, with Canada, well, it's much easier because member states decide that qualified majority. Here, no. Here you have unanimity. It means that all the progress that you are doing during the negotiating phase is carefully observed and screened by member states. It should be a real progress. It should be a real advancement because there are no discounts here. It's not a negotiation where we can find whatever solution. The solution is the accession. And the accession is the participation in all the policies of the European Union, including in the decision making. It's not just trade policy, it's the internal market, fundamental right, foreign policy. That's why this process seems to be so cumbersome, and actually it's so cumbersome. We try to simplify this process with the approach for clusters, in the 6 clusters, and we provide, during the negotiations, 2 kinds of assessments. An assessment on the state of play and an assessment on the yearly progress. So here, we try to give at a glance what is the situation for Serbia. In terms of state of play, the general overview is that you have clusters where you have all chapters open, like in fundamentals and in the green agenda. clusters like internal market where you have less clusters open, 4. In competitiveness, 5. In resources, agriculture and cohesion, 2. And in external relations, 1, the common foreign and security policy is still under observation by the Council. Now, if we cross these two assessments, we'll have on one side the state of play, on the other side the early progress. And it's not that evident to compare the two columns here. Because if you look at a good level of preparation, 7 chapters here, you cannot compare them with the necessity of having some or a good progress. Because when you reach a good level of preparation, at some point your process may stall. And this is what happened to Serbia in the case of intellectual property, for example, or company law. There is a good level of preparation and no progress. One does not contradict the other. So that's a part that is good to remember to see what Serbia is actually doing. In certain cases, it reached a good level, but there is still a lot to do, like the ambassador said. As you can see, this year we have no backsliding, but is no backsliding on a full chapter. Because if, as the ambassador explained, in chapter 23, which is made out of 4 sub-chapters, judiciary, fight of corruption, fundamental rights, and freedom of expression, on one of them there is actually backsliding. But is it correct also what Minister Starovic said, that there is no backsliding on a whole chapter? Here you have the complete view on the report. As you can see, it's quite immediate. Serbia has some level of preparation in all the chapters and is moderately prepared on many chapters. Good level of preparation only on some of them. Now, we will look in particular into, you want to go back? You are taking pictures? Okay, please. I think we can distribute the slides later. Now, we will focus on the economic criteria, saying something about the fundamentals, the existence of a functioning market economy, and the capacity to cope with the competitive pressure. And here, the situation is a bit more complex. So the key takeaways for the existence of a functioning market economy were already resumed by the ambassador. Economic activity was robust in 2024, but slow in 2025. And this is something that we will look into, in particular concerning the FDIs. The business environment is hampered by red tape, weaknesses in the rule of law, limited efficiency and transparency of the public administration. These are parts of the complaints that are in the report and that I have personally learned from many companies here in Belgrade. And then there are some market interventions, like the retail margin cap. This is a very special measure that risks to distort the markets, create losses, and slow and deteriorate the business climate. So these are measures that we have to consider, and I would like to do in the conclusion in a more broad way, because it's not only one measure, but it's a complex of measures that are more related to political aspects than to the economic aspects. This is something that business is complaining about, and I will be happy to have your views on that. Now, priority for next year. So far in the monetary policy, Serbia did well. It managed to get price stability comparing to the previous period, and even to reduce the inflation more lately. On this we will come back again. The public sector wage system is also another delicate point on which we need to improve for several reasons. One is corruption, the other is the need for efficiency, and the other is that sometimes officials prefer to be absent from work to have a second job, and that's another consequence of the low wages. If you want to get rid of that, yes, you have to look into the wage of workers. This is true for companies as well, and I know that, businessmen are not so happy about it, but we will discuss this point also. And then there is a full implementation of the state-owned enterprise. That is something we have to improve in order to have a better business climate. Now, on the capacity to cope with competitive pressure and market forces, there is a strong integration already of companies in Serbia. Many companies are European companies, actually, and they benefit from integration created by the Stability and Association Agreement. But there are shortcomings in the education, for example, and in the transition from education to work, which is something quite key. There are infrastructure gaps, where my colleagues will come back later in the panel. And further efforts are needed in the green transition and the green diversification. So the priorities in these are improving education and vocational training, public investment management, that's a key. You have to invest public money, yes. You have to do that under strict and advanced methodologies that exist, that were drawn by World Bank in the 70s, so it's not something new. And then you have to advance on the green transition, reforms on improving connectivity, on diversify sources of energy. This is a point that is very clear in that moment to political authorities, because Serbia is paying its strong dependencies on Russian energy. That's something that you have to consider, not only for the energy aspects, but also for rare earth and for all the critical dependencies that Serbia is to develop. So here, with the ambassador and the colleagues, we witness a strong commitment from the Serbian authorities to shift away energy supply from Russia and not to fall into the hands of a single provider, because energy security means diversification, and this is very clear. It's very clear to the president, very clear to the ministers. And now we'll have a look to some selected key figures, not all of them, just to try to get some conclusion. The GDP per capita is increasing. The real GDP growth was in the year of reference of the report at 3.9, and is expected to have a slow decline but still be strong and sustained in the next years at 3%. But, there is a but. This is a baseline scenario. It's possible that some adverse scenario develop. And I'm referring here to the energy crisis, because it's possible that if the refinery of Serbia Pančevo stops for 1 year, you won't have this 3% increase. You will get negative growth, because 70% of the transport here is run by diesel. If there is no diesel, import of diesel and distribution in Serbia faces very strong bottleneck. So these may translate in an increase of prices, in a reduction of production, and in the suffocation of the transport system. So I don't want to tell you that this is the real scenario. The scenarios and the observation that we are having for the forecast, these are not forecasts, are not based on that, are based on the fact that the president will find a solution to the Nice crisis. But in case it's not, there is a major risk. And as colleagues remember, there is also a risk of financial crisis in case banks are tackled by American secondary sanctions. This is one of the observations I would like to do on real GDP growth. On nominal wages, it's also worth recalling that wages are increasing. And they're increasing because Serbia is shifting from a blue-collar economy to a white-collar economy, and there is very little to do about it. This is not anymore probably a place for cheaper production. This is a structural change, and companies must be aware of that. This will recall in the conclusions, because every business decision should take that into account. And then FDIs. The ambassador recalled that FDIs fell down in the first part of 2025. This is not reflected in the report. But if I look into the academia and literature, the conclusions for this decline of FDIs are several. There is not only one. Many refer to the fragilized political situation, and this is most likely a possibility, the domestic tensions, the lower demand in the EU. Remember that connection of Serbia with the EU is very strong. We are the main trade partner, 60% of trade, so of course we have an effect on Serbia production. There is geopolitical fragmentation. So far, Serbia has exploited a position between the two blocks. And now this position between the two blocks is shrinking. It's not anymore possible to play a game on both sides. This is for the interplay of sanctions, European and Americans, and that's because the economy at some point must decide. And it's a phenomenon called fragmentation that was analyzed by the IMF in a study of 2 years ago that was updated lately, and demonstrating that FDI tends to concentrate it in geopolitical close areas, rather than looking only into the supply chain benefit. This is quite telling. This is what we call friendshoring. And Serbia so far, playing on both sides, the Chinese and with the Europeans, managed to do something, but the game seems not to have so much space anymore. And the final factor that may have brought the reduction of FDIs is what I said before, the labor costs. Labor costs are increasing. So Serbia is not attracting any more cheap production, but it has to look into high-end productions or high-level part of the economy. So, back to the report. On the internal market, where we have 4 chapters open, free movement of capital, company law, intellectual property law, and financial services, we observe this phenomenon we said before, moderately prepare, and some progress or no progress, because there is a level of stock of laws and acquis that was already elaborated, and a little momentum to conclude on these chapters. In cluster 3, competitiveness and inclusive growth, we have open chapters 17 on economic and monetary policy, where Serbia is doing very well, that's the best. Enterprise and industrial policy, science and research, education and culture, and customs. Here the paradox is that on 25th and 26th, the chapters have been provisionally closed, but as explained in the report, for chapter 26, education and culture, there is an erosion of academic freedom. It was reported, and it's in our report, that there are cases of discrimination based on political affiliation and union activity. This is a regression that is not reflected in the full chapter. The chapter is still provisionally concluded, but it's another case where you reach a certain level and it's not certain that you stay on this level. The green agenda and sustainable connectivity. All these chapters are open: transport, energy, trans-European networks, environment and climate change. And here we have a look on these more economic chapters with the state of play. Now, I would look just in a couple of economic aspects. So when in Serbia I hear that there is this great friendship with Russia and we trade with Russia, please just make a comparison. Remember that what Russia exports is a choke point that you need to diversify because it's all hydrocarbons. But the comparison between the EU as a trade partner with other trade partners, it's enormous. We are 60%, China is 10%. And Russia 3.5, so that's quite telling. And when you see in total export to the EU is 62%, with a growth 6-fold in 15 years, demonstrating that our trade agreement works, that Serbia is integrated with the EU from the trade and investment perspective. So despite all the progress that you can do or not do in the accession, This is a benefit of the EU integration, and this is something that should not be lost, because it would come with a huge cost for the Serbian economy. Also, in terms of imports, EU is largely prevailing with 56% of the total. And then investments. In investments, the EU is 56% versus 16% from China. The stock of European investment here is 24 billion, so quite impressive. Direct supported jobs are around 300,000, much larger, 10 times more, the indirect supported jobs. The sectors where these investments are cars, electric machineries, chemicals, rubber, retail, and pharma. So I would come now to the conclusions on what we said so far. Conclusions, I would say, is a general assessment that I already suggested, and some positive and negative recommendations. The assessment is that Serbia is economically speaking, in this transition phase. From blue collar to white collar, is going up the value chain, and this is the reason for this increase of wages. We cannot go back. This is not a country that you can exploit for cheap production, but you can exploit for many other more advanced part of the economy. In terms of positive recommendation, the report recalls to improve on rule of law, on reducing the red tape, the state-owned enterprise, public administration, and skilled workforce. This is essential. This is something that companies keep on repeating to us. I would add, in terms of positive recommendation, that efforts here should not be hampered by the political economic cycle. Because what we saw for this price margin cap that was the objective to reduce in the short-term inflation, well, it succeeded. It reduced in the short-term inflation. Inflation went down in September. But according to our models, there will be a rebound. It's like a shot of heroin, these things. It doesn't work in the long run. And other suggestion you can have on the trade part. We saw that Serbia concluded a free trade agreement with China. I mean, in trade, I cannot judge. I cannot say a trade agreement is bad. Any trade agreement is good in trade. Trade is not a bilateral relation, like my Director General in Brussels said, is polyamory. You have to have relation with everyone. But provided that you look into your critical dependencies. That's the point. Because until you have trade and both parties benefit, okay. But if a country exploits you and you become dependent, and China and Russia are quite good in this, well, you have to pay attention. So I would conclude here. I think this consideration may be useful for the next panel, chaired by Natasha Udovici. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pasquale, for your insightful comments, as well as perhaps for your colorful metaphors about the state of play of the economy. I would like to thank all speakers that have intervened today so far, and would like to give the floor to Mr. Nataša Gajić-Udovički, Trade Officer in the EU delegation to Serbia, to take over as the moderator for the upcoming panel. Natasha, the floor and the panel is yours. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello from my side as well. I would once again like to wish you a warm welcome to the Europe House. Thank you for coming. And I would also like to thank all the colleagues following us online. We have a YouTube channel open, and I would like to invite you all, including the colleagues who are following us online, to start thinking about questions that they might want to raise during the Q&A session that will come after the panel. So prepare sharpen your pens and let's discuss. I'm pretty sure that what Pasquale had to say was already inspiring enough to give you a good food for thought and prepare for good questions. Now, concerning the panel, I would like to announce the panel today that would focus, as you might predict, on the most pressing issues that businesses face today, in the recent weeks in particular, related to resilience of supply chains, energy security, transport, logistics, and in particular trade facilitation measures. I have a distinguished panel. We have 5 distinguished speakers who will join me today at the stage to discuss about these really important and pressing issues that I'm pretty sure are problematic for all the businesses that have joined us today. I am delighted to invite the following panelists to the stage. First, Mrs. Silvia Rakic, the Secretary General of SEBAC, the Council of European Business Associations and Chambers. Silvia, please. Then I would like to invite Dr. Ronald Zellinger, President of the Board of the Foreign Investors Council and the CEO of Hemopharm Group, to join us next to Silvia. Dr. Zellinger, please. I would like to invite Mr. Dragoljub Damjanovic, Vice President of Schneider Electric International Sales Digital Grid and Director of the Development Center of Schneider Electric in Novi Sad. I am particularly delighted to also welcome Mr. Matej Zakonjšek, the Head of Transport Community Secretariat, headquartered here in Belgrade. And finally, I would like to invite Mr. Mauro De Veroli, our Head of Cooperation section in the delegation of the European Union to the Republic of Serbia. Thank you all very much for joining us. So I will first start with the lady, with SEBAC, the recently established association of European business associations and chambers. Silvia, many European businesses in Serbia are watching the situation with US sanctions against NIS very closely, given the potential impact on energy supply, on production, on logistics, and in particular also on state revenues of the state budget, potential impact on inflation, and so on. How are SEBAC member chambers assessing the risks of this potential energy disruption, and what kind of clarity or coordination do you expect from the authorities, but also from the EU?
Thank you, Natasha, for having SEBAC today at this panel discussion, as you said, with very distinguished panelists and colleagues. And thank you for this question, which is of huge importance to the business community in Serbia. And of course, SEBAC has been devoting very high attention to this topic and the sanctions on NIS. As you were saying, energy, as we have seen in 2022, has this special power of affecting all economic sectors. So the sanctions on NIS have a multidimensional impact on the whole economy and all, especially manufacturing sectors. Short-term effects will, of course, be seen in terms of transport costs and production costs, of course, whereas in the long term, they might strongly affect the competitiveness of the companies operating in Serbia and their capacity to participate in EU supply chain. Needless to say, NIS represents about 7% of the GDP of these states, so any disruption in its operation has huge effects on the revenue side and on the budget of the state, which again implies fewer resources for badly needed investments in energy sector, in infrastructure, and export support. And these 3 measures are very badly needed by the business community that has been affected by disruption in global and local supply chains, if I may say. We are, I have to admit, worried about the capacity of the small and medium-sized enterprises to hold on in these situations. Their budgets have been, their margins have been somehow kept by disruptions in supply chain, again at European and global levels, so capacity to react in this respect is lower than for larger enterprises that might have financial and human resources to adapt to a changing situation on the ground, even though compliance questions arise also for large companies. Again, we have companies that are large energy consumers and that see CBAM at their front door coming in January 2026. So again, it's a long stretch for them to cope in this situation too. Despite this somehow negative scenario, of course, at SEBAC we see all of this as an opportunity too. We are not paid to be optimistic, but we tend to do so. So we see this as an opportunity, an early opportunity for companies in Serbia to adapt to the EU climate policy, environmental policy, and energy policy. So we hope that with the correct support coming from the EU and from the Serbian authority, we will be all able to cope with this in a little bit easier manner. As for what SEBAC and the more than 2,000 companies SEBAC represents expect from Serbian authorities and the EU as well, first of all, clarity and transparency in terms of communication about the potential next steps. Clarity and transparency provide predictability. That is something that the business community cares a lot about, especially when further investments are taken into consideration. From the Serbian authorities as well, potentially if the energy crisis breaks in its negative potential scenario, as Mr. D'Amico was saying, something that could be of use is, of course, the use of strategic reserves for critical sectors, the fast-tracking of procedure for further diversification of energy suppliers, but also to use the chance to think and foster reforms in some legislative aspects. So, for example, the use of alternative fuels would very much support large energy consumers, for example, in this respect, but will also spill over in positive effects on other aspects of the economy, so waste management, needless to say, among the others. As for the EU support, again, besides, again, transparency and clarity about the possible outcomes and scenarios that are bred for, and the information for the companies, thinking about potentially financing temporary storages for energy supplies for companies would be, of course, of great use, and then again supporting technically the local government that is facing a huge challenge in this respect. Last but not least, I would very much like to connect what the Ambassador von Beckerath said, and as well Mr. D'Amico underlined in his address, and is very well written in the report. As SEBAC, we also see the state-owned enterprises as an important bottleneck in daily operations of companies, actually. So we really are supportive of further liberalization of this aspect of the market, because on one hand, it will provide for larger competitiveness on the side of the Serbian economy, but it will also foster more technological investments and provide more resources also for the maintenance and modernization of the infrastructure and the grid that already is in place. So I would not use the time of the other speakers. That would be it from SEBAC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia. I think you covered a lot of ground, a lot of interesting issues and considerations that you managed to put on the table. Now I would like to invite Ronald to maybe go further deeper into how the Foreign Investors Council and the member companies would assess Serbia's current level of energy security from an investor standpoint, and what contingency measures in particular do the member companies see as priorities?
First of all, thanks for having FIC also on this panel. I think it's we combine an important voice coming from the outside, and we obviously saw also that huge downturn of foreign direct investments, which is a very loud warning sign that things might not continue as they did. What I also would like to once again appreciate, and we had this in our discussion already from FIC to EU ambassador, and thanks for this, the clear naming of the things which are not going well. So your speech and also your speech, Pasquale, I think this is something which we are desperately longing for, because for us, you know, we are not politicians. We name it by it is. We are having a quite concerned eye on energy supply and infrastructure. And for us, let's say the development which also you described over the past, with the ever-rising costs, and frankly also this uncertainty of the provision on the supply is a big issue, which our investors are asking for, and frankly also tie the decisions on further investments, despite the fact that we are not new investors and we are basically continuing investing, but we are all the ones which are here represented are belonging to a bigger group, and with all due respect to this beautiful country, but there are other options to invest in, and some decisions are taken. And I can unfortunately see this also from the company I'm proud to present, that sometimes investments, despite the fact that they should come here, are going somewhere else because of this, because of country risk, because of all these things. Not even to go further than energy, because these are huge criteria. In regards to the question, I'm sorry for this kind of extension, but frankly, I felt that you actually almost answered my question quite comprehensively, so thank you very much for doing my job. This makes it much easier, and so I can just bubble as I do mostly on other things, but to have this diversification and to get more independent from a single source, which is probably prone to be sanctioned or prone to be taken out. Once again, I see on the need of, let's say, our very own company, that sometimes we don't have any other options, despite the fact that we need, and we are very well focusing on observing any regulations, sanctions which are coming in. But if there is no choice, there is no bloody choice. So what to do, actually? We write big pamphlets, try to defend ourselves, but this is a position a company shall not be in. And this is a position which is both caused, actually, by the government here, but also in a way by European Union, with all due respect, not taking this into consideration and probably having not pushed further on this earlier, stronger. I'm welcoming the more straighter tone on also on the report. We have to highlight, we have to push on this in order to give companies like ours actually options to be compliant and still energy safe. The green transition, provision of alternative energy and in green investments, yes, it is a big issue. We all are tight and are actually happy to oblige ourselves into running companies more sustainable. It is now additionally also in plenty of laws requested from European Union or countries of origin. So we do this, but again, which options do we have? This is, we are like flies running on the same pile of energy, which is supposed to be more greener, but all knowing that actually the energy is not as green as it is. I was from my management team, for instance, heavily criticized to drive a fully electric car, because where is the bloody energy coming from? Obrenovac. So, I mean, is this a clean option to run a car? Probably not, but nevertheless, I try to make a statement here and drive drive crazy in terms of infrastructure, because where to charge the car is actually unbeknown. So when we go outside of Belgrade, we switch to normal combustion engine, because otherwise we got stuck, and I don't want to push the car. Yeah, I think this is, you mentioned the strategic reserves and probably fiscal incentives to change things and to support us in all this. And all it comes back also to the jurisdictional system, the legal system, get the right laws in place, and the bylaws. We all know that laws are not everything. Actually, they are nothing without the bylaws, and we are waiting for ages for bylaws to actually make this happen. And then, yes, I liked your comment whether some officials are actually at their workplace in order to stamp relevant documents. Okay, I don't want to go so far, but let's say it sounded familiar. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Ronald. Thank you, Ronald, very much. We will now move to Dragoljub and try to use a little bit of his rich experience from Schneider Electric. Dragoljub, in the context of the EU Green Agenda and Serbia's goal to diversify energy sources, how do you see the role of energy efficiency and digitalization in accelerating Serbia's transition towards renewables and low-carbon industry? And what kind of partnerships do you think would be crucial for Serbia to unlock this potential?
Good afternoon to all. It's a great pleasure to be here. I think many of us are talking about new sources of energy, new supply, new investments that we need to do, but we tend to forget that almost one big nuclear plant lies in the potential of energy efficiency. All our facilities, industries, households, buildings, you name it. So I think there is a huge potential for any kind of enterprises to really run their businesses much more efficient, run their, let's say, operations, supply chains much more efficient, reduce their carbon footprint, and reduce the energy inputs that they need. They will save for sure in the long run some money there and be more productive and more profitable, but also they will help with, let's say, releasing the pressure on the general energy supply. Serbia, unfortunately, didn't really focus that much on the energy efficiency story. Many companies did by themselves because they have global company programs, or they have some targets to reduce their, let's say, use of energy per production unit or per square meter or whatsoever. But it's, I would say, it's just the start. There is many, many things that we can do better. When we look at the average consumption of a typical office building or a typical, let's say, industry in Serbia versus the rest of the world, I would say, more developed world, it's sometimes few times higher than it should be. I think there is a huge potential there. With a little bit of investments, many things could be done to reduce the energy consumption and really to become much more efficient in your operation. And second story, in digitization, big part of that is also digitization. So actually digitizing your processes, digitizing the grid itself, either it's electrical grid or it's a gas grid, it will help a lot to take in more renewables, to run the grid itself, or to run the operation itself in much more efficient way, and to introduce transparency. I think it's very important to do that for the businesses, but also to make the most of existing resources that we already have. And with, I would say, some relatively modest investments, we can really do much more than just with bulk investments in production, which we have to do for sure. But also we need to work on this as well. It's very, very, very important to do that because I think this is the most speedy and the most, I would say, cheapest way to unleash the pressure, a bit of pressure on the energy supply.
Low-hanging fruits.
Yes.
Thank you, Dragoljub. So now we heard the positions of the business sector, and now we are going to ask Mauro, from the EU standpoint, what mechanisms or instruments are available to help and support Serbia manage the potential energy supply disruptions while staying aligned with the EU's broader energy security framework and, of course, our green agenda?
Thank you, Natasha. Good afternoon, everyone. Indeed, let me start by saying that, well, the EU has been a long-standing partner in the energy sector in Serbia in the good times and in the bad times. And since 2007, we have allocated more than 800 million euros of funds to the energy sector. And most of these funds were used to leverage additional financing from partner financial institutions. So our impact in the sector, I think, has been quite significant. But like I said, it's especially in bad times that the friends, let's say, are coming to provide help. And you will probably recall that in 2023, when the energy crisis hit the continent, the energy crisis due to Russia's war of aggression towards Ukraine, we came up here with a significant package of 165 million euros to support households and businesses to go through the crisis. And again today, Serbia is facing a very critical moment. It was explained already and mentioned by the previous speakers, and we have come forward with help. We have invited very concretely Serbia to join the oil coordination group, which precisely together with member states tries to come up with solutions to address oil security supplies. And we are doing the same also in the gas sector. We have invited Serbia to join the aggregated purchase platform, which aims at, well, purchasing gas in bulk and therefore reducing the price. These are some concrete measures that we've taken immediately to help Serbia in the current circumstances. And on the midterm, we are also looking at supporting the country by upgrading, modernizing the gas infrastructure. Because if we want diversification from the for the time being, the only supplier to take place, it's also important to look at the readiness of the gas infrastructure in the country. And here we are looking both at the domestic network, but also at the interconnectors towards Bulgaria, which we supported also for the construction a few years ago, North Macedonia as well, and on the longer term, other possible solutions. And of course, there is also the regulatory and the legal aspects, because I mean, investing in gas is important, but also reforming the gas market is probably even more important. And there are some reforms, such as the unbundling of the market, the certification of the transmission system operator, the allocation of capacities at the border, that are really at the core of the market reform process. And we are helping Serbia with these reforms. Not only that, we are actually attaching also a financial reward if they do it through the reform agenda, the growth plan and the reform agenda. If these reforms are implemented, then Serbia will get access also to a significant amount of funds. So this is what we do right now. But let me conclude by saying that the ultimate objective remains the green agenda, and I'm glad that the previous speakers touched upon the green transition, because in the current circumstances, I think the risk is to lose sight from the real objective, which is to diversify away from fossil fuels. And I think in this case, it's fair to say that our commitment has been quite solid, and we have provided significant funds, for instance, for the modernization of hydropower plants, renewable energy projects such as coastal, for instance, and of course we are also working on the demand, especially concerning energy efficiency in public building. And we try also to reach out to the private sector with concrete support through guarantees of grant, loans, blending mechanism in order to green the business. So in a nutshell, this is how we support the energy sector now and also in the future.
Thank you very much, Mauro. Now we will dive a bit into the trade facilitation world. And here I will first give the floor to Matej, As the Director of Transport Community Secretariat, Matej, what are you doing in the context of the green lanes as part of the growth plan for the Western Balkans?
Thank you very much. And continuing with the fashion of naming things as they are, I think we can all agree, you can all agree that the trucks are waiting too long at the border crossing points in our region. I think everybody who has a car and goes to Croatia or Hungary or beyond can see that with his own or her own eyes. And that's why at the time, specifically when it was a COVID pandemic, when the borders were actually closing, together with our colleagues from CEFTA and the European Commission and the countries in the region, we said we need to make sure that the trade continues. And at that time, the idea of the green lanes became alive. That basically meant the exchange of data of the customs, and that has basically started at that time, and it really shows what happens when the political priorities and the necessity on the grounds meet. The project was started in March as an idea, and it was implemented in April. It took 1 month for the implementation. And because of the green lanes that start functioning within the Western Balkans, more than 20 years of waiting times was saved for the trucks, only within the Western Balkans. But because it worked within the region, we then started expanding it, extending it to the borders between the region and the European Union. So now we have already 6 agreements signed, including the one between Hungary and Serbia, but also between Greece and North Macedonia, Albania and Italy and so on, which actually do the same thing. But of course, this is only step 1. The step 2 was the extension, and the step 3 is we need to modernize the border crossing points. And that's why we have identified 11 busiest border crossing points across the region and with the EU, and we have prepared, together with the European Commission, investing plan that would actually reduce the waiting at the borders between 50 to 80%, depending on the border crossing point. So this is what we are doing.
Thank you very much. So we could divide the support provided by the Transport Community Secretariat and the EU in general basically in financial support, structural support, and procedural support.
Yes, indeed, because when we are talking about transport, if we are not talking about the borders, then what have we done by investing millions and zillions into the new roads and rail if the trucks are then stuck for hours and hours at the border crossing? You are basically in the summer month, importing strawberries but exporting jam. And so this is something that, of course, limits the trade. It limits what you want to do, and it limits, the numbers that we have seen on the graph before. So I think it's we're really talking about the network, and the network means everything together, including the border crossings and including the procedures when it comes to that.
Thank you, Matej. I think you gave us an excellent beginning of the second round of questions that I have for my panelists, with a kind request for all of you to please stick to a maximum of 3 minutes so that we allow time for questions from the audience. So first, we move back to Silvia again. Silvia, beyond the immediate energy challenge, what structural steps do you believe Serbia should take to make the supply chains more resilient in terms of logistics, customs efficiency, and sustainable transport? And how can the EU step in and support Serbia in this regard?
Well, thank you again. Well, there are a couple of priorities we see on how resilience could be fostered by improvement, especially in customs and transportation. Well, first of all, pushing further for multimodal transport or further connectivity between Serbia and the region, including non-EU member states. In this regard, is of utmost importance. So intermodal terminals, modern intermodal terminals, and the exploration of the use of the Danube, provided that the climate allows so, would be of great importance, given that the reliance on road freight is too high in Serbia, albeit it does make sense for some of the goods produced in the country. Further digitalization and shared procedures with the EU for customs would be also very much needed to reduce further the waiting times at the borders. The introduction of a single window customs system would also be very soon possibly, as well as expanded digital certificates and inspection. As Dragoljub said with regards to energy efficiency, also in this aspect there are a couple of solutions that are not that attractive and flashy, but could still provide support, especially in the short run. Such as the resolution of the visa regime for the cabin crew of road freight transport systems, that from our standing point is a huge challenge to manufacturing companies in Serbia, but also the mutual recognition of the authorized economic operators and further supporting their involvement from Serbia's side would be of great use. I will not go into the fact that resilience lies on sustainability and the further need to make the connectivity of Serbia to the region and the EU as green as possible in logical and practical terms. As for the EU support, I believe that in this aspect, the EU has already indeed some instruments that are of great use. So we would like to see Serbia really leveraging on the performance-based instrument that is provided through the reform agenda. Performance-based is something that a principle that companies really like. Businesses work on performance agendas because they set a clear direction and a clear path for them. And again, provide predictability. That is something that investors are looking for. We also think that in the context of the growth plan, further integration in the EU supply chain shall be fostered, of course, through Pillar 1 and 2, but I would underline the importance of Pillar 2 that deals with regional connectivity in this respect. Considering we are all small and fragmented markets here, we believe that the regional aspect could really be a way for businesses to scale up, to adapt and better connect themselves to the EU supply chain. And in this respect, we very much salute the initiative of the Single Market Highway that we strongly believe could set also priorities for the government of Serbia in this regard. Last but not least, I'm very well beyond my 3 minutes, I'm sorry. One thing that we really appreciated is direct engagement between DG ENEST, in charge for enlargement, and the business community, with call for proposals that were directly addressed to companies in the Western Balkans and that foster cooperation with companies from the EU and as a consequence imply a higher technological and innovation component in the local economy. As SEBAC, of course, we will try to push on these priorities, engaging in dialogue with the local authorities, international stakeholders, and setting priority traits on what are the desired outcomes from the business community and where the red lines lie. Thank you.
Thank you, Silvia. Once again, I think you managed to cover a lot of ground, really, really very much appreciated. Ronald, from your rich corporate management experience, what do you see as key trade facilitation measures that could strengthen Serbia's competitiveness to integrate deeper into EU supply chains? And what can the EU do better to support these efforts? Or what would be your policy recommendations for both Serbia and the EU in this regard?
Because I gave half of my time to you already, so I will be much faster, not repeating myself about the infrastructure itself. I think the regulatory and permit alignment and harmonization is one of the things which is really hard to understand why it hasn't progressed as much as it should. We had problems for the milk powder in the past where basically everyone was already almost forgetting about the disease which caused this, and Serbian authorities still had the ban, and we basically ran dry out of this which affected a lot of industries and a lot of companies actually in those days. And it took a lot of effort just to do the obvious. So why the hell did we need to push in the first place? Never mind. I think actually what I would like to add upon all what has been said is that we shall never forget that the EU is also a large contributor in building up these trade, let's say, infrastructure and facilitation. And, you know, again, from my point of view, if you give money, you have a right to look into things, how they are done. And I'm not delving too much into the meaning of, let's say, reallocating funds to different purposes, which has been addressed, I guess, already a couple of weeks ago in European Parliament while reviewing, obviously, a quite unfortunate incident which happened in November last year. So, I mean, if you invest, if you subsidize, ask for appropriate use of the funds, co-financing, and the right prioritization. I have in my previous life actually experienced now how to use also public funding in a different manner, and the secret is really in a close observation and close monitoring and close co-management of things, and the readiness also to stop money once you see it has not been used appropriately. I see that EU might wish to ramp up on their courage to do so in this regards for the benefit of ours, because in the end, yes, we are sick and tired of running, passing by 2, 3, 4 kilometers of trucks lined up at the borders and seeing our goods being rotting inside and our truck drivers basically wasting their time. So prioritize infrastructure upgrades, have the appropriate corridors being set up and even fostered. These are the things which needs to be done together with a emphasis on the regulatory part and the permit part.
Thank you very much. Dragoljub, what incentives or policy measures could best support private sector investment in renewable energy and green logistics as part of Serbia's integration into EU supply chains? What would be your recommendation?
I would say there are two things. I think EU should use their power in regulatory part, where we need to help the state to actually the laws are there, but as we just mentioned before, they are not applicable still. There are no bylaws, there are no instructions how to do that, especially about new types of, let's say, prosumers, consumers in electrical energy, even gas. So this is something where with the support from the, I would say, institutional regulatory approach, EU should definitely help to speed up all this process and reduce the permitting, connections, and everything else. And the second is also, especially for SMEs and, let's say, small enterprise, medium industries, it's co-financing or, let's say, providing some financial lines for, let's say, renewables installation on their, let's say, facilities, for energy efficiency things, for everything the companies could do to reduce their, let's say, energy consumption, to increase the green part of energy that they use by their own actions, and also providing some basic engineering help through some, let's say, institutions to do that. They are relatively simple things, but companies just don't do that because they don't have the first money and maybe sometimes a bit of experience and knowledge. I think by doing that, a lot of companies that are private enterprises could really make it much more efficient the way they run their operations, and definitely much more green.
Thank you, Dragoljub. Silvia has already mentioned pillars 1 and 2 of the growth plan, and in this context I would refer now to Matej again with a question: how can regional connectivity help Serbia and its neighbors maintain stable supply chains in the face of potential energy or geopolitical shocks?
I mean, just to continue on the same leitmotif that we started before, it's about network. And if you want to have a multimodal network, the basis for it when it comes to transport is rail. And of course, we have seen that in the last 40 years, 80% of all investments went into the road network. That's why the roads, specifically on the core network, are relatively good. But of course, exactly the opposite happened on the rail. And now, if we would like to have, the modern network, we need to continue with the investments in rail that Serbia, but also the other region has, with the help of EU, really started in the last, let's say, decade or in the last 5 years specifically. Because, of course, if we see the bird-eye view of the region, that should be the shortest connection, not only for the region, but also between the region, between Europe and Middle East, between the region and Europe and Asia. When the ships pass Suez, they should actually all, by logic, looking at the map, come to the ports in Adriatic, come to the ports in Aegean, and then with a modern rail connection in 2 days, reach the entire Europe. They don't. Why? Because we need to fix the railway systems and we need to fix the borders. And that is the key investment in the upcoming years to really profit on everything that you have said. And of course, here Serbia is in the middle of that. So that is why this should really be the priority for the upcoming period.
Thank you very much, Matej. And now, finally, to wrap up, I would invite Mauro to give us a perspective of the EU. How does the EU see Serbia's role evolving within the region's supply and transport networks as part of the growth plan for the Western Balkans?
Well, much has been said, actually. Probably the best answer to give is to try to summarize what the previous speakers already mentioned. But obviously for us, I mean, for the EU, the way forward is the growth plan. This is the big innovative instrument that we are now deploying, and some of the issues that were mentioned are already part and parcel of the growth plan. Just to mention one, I mean, the green lanes, and I will not say more because the architect is here next to me, but the growth plan is really about trade facilitation and further integration into the EU single market with very concrete measures. We are talking about SEPA roaming that will decrease costs for business and for citizens. We're talking about the conformity assessment process that is very relevant for Serbia, and the single market highway, of course, was mentioned. And part and parcel of the growth plan is also infrastructure, is also investments. I think it's also important, and this was also already mentioned, that Serbia is both a regional economic powerhouse and it's also centrally geographically located. So the investment, the economic investments that we implement in Serbia have a trickle-down effect on the entire region. And this is actually why it is so important that we invest in rail, as Matej said, because it's precisely through the railway network that probably we can foster faster economic growth. And this is also why for the EU it is a key sector of cooperation here, the railway sector. But infrastructure alone are certainly not enough. First of all, and I would like to come back to what you were saying, it's important to prioritize, and even in the context of the railway network. And prioritization is also linked to what my colleague Pasquale was saying about financial investment management, and looking precisely at the entire cycle of how we build, we design, build, implement, operate, and eventually divest infrastructure as well. So all these issues, soft issues, are also require attention and I would say support from the EU and the partners, and this is how we're going to do it in the near future together with Serbia.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank warmly to all the participants of the panel. Thank you very much. We hereby close the panel. I would like to ask you to remain in your positions, and we can now open the discussion. We will remain willing to answer any questions that you might have. I will also be free maybe to give the floor to some of the panelists if they wish so. So please, the floor is yours. Can we have somebody to move the mic, please? Mr. Marcus, please.
We all already mentioned the long queues at the border crossings. So I spoke with some companies that are our members, and they say to become an authorized operator, actually it's nice, but it makes no sense because it only helps at the last 100 meters. Before you stand 2 kilometers in the queue with all others, because there is only one queue, there is only one line. And so it is very much linked. Infrastructure and, how to say, processing is very much linked with each other. I mean, we all here are not actually the only stakeholder here, because there should be someone from the Serbian state here, and because they will, and the neighbors, they should actually develop this infrastructure. But what are there any specific plans on that topic, that there will be more than one queue or more than one line?
Thank you, Alexander. Yes, indeed, this is about the green lanes and the work we are doing in this regard. And as I mentioned, and as Mate mentioned, there's a lot of work going on. And I would give the floor maybe to Mate first, yes?
Thank you very
Please.
much. Indeed, exactly what you said. I mean, the borders are probably one of the most complex mechanisms, not only because, of course, you have phytosanitary inspections, you have police, you have customs, you have transporters, and they need to be well coordinated on one side of the border and then also on the other side of the border at the same time. It brings a lot of different people together, and that's why it is complex. But exactly because of this, together with the European Commission, we have taken 11 busiest border crossings, and we are talking about all of them who we always talk about, and we went really forensically through everything, both on the processing side, digitalization, cameras, weighing scales, and so on. Infrastructure side, there is a need for new road or new lane and so on, and the HR side, which is equally important because sometimes it's about the working hours, the number of lanes that can be opened due to the number of people working, and so on. So this has been done. So the plans are there. The finances has also been secured by the European Commission, and now we will go into financing. But rest assured, exactly what you have said is definitely very much not only planned, but already in a certain stage of execution. But of course, it will take time.
Indeed. What I can only add is that for sure the European Commission is well aware of the waiting hours at the borders, and it is well aware that it is a serious headache for all the businesses, and that is why this really comprehensive exercise was initiated and is underway. So we can expect results in the coming, let's say, months, or in some cases years, depending on if it's about infrastructure, maybe years, but if it's about procedures, probably rather months. I've checked. So we have a question from, yes, please.
Thank you. Michiel van Erkel, Agriculture Council, Netherlands Embassy. Since 3 months, and interestingly enough, within 3 months, 3 issues. I would like to refer to 5 words that Pasquale used. He said, part of a complex of measures related to the margin cap. And indeed, I've seen the margin cap. That was on day 1 when I arrived. Then I think in the second week I had the dairy health certificate, which was on the discussion, solved, thank God. Then last week we had the import licenses, solved for at least till the end of the year, I hope. In general, several issues and challenges, and that indeed, on hindsight, would say, okay, are they all part of a bigger issue? Are we talking about non-tariff barriers in this case? I don't know actually how to put the question or to whom to put the question, but how could we approach this on a more complex, taking them all together? Because I have the feeling that if I solve one fire, I can run to the next one and then return probably to the first fire, which is still smoldering and flaring up after 2 months. Again, question mark? I don't know, something like that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. When it's trade, I'm very happy to give some suggestions. So, brutally speaking, we reformed the enforcement regulation of the European Union that allows to react immediately with retaliation in case there are trade barriers or non-trade barriers that violate existing agreements. So said, this is a country in accession. It was never used, and people say it was never used, we cannot use. But this is not a justification. Before recurring to retaliation and arbitration, of course, we will leave the door open to diplomacy and try to speak. And in many cases, we succeeded, because the most part of these barriers, they have a shorter duration. And that's a guacamole process that you just mentioned. You close one and another opens. But this is the way to proceed. As soon as we have a case, as soon as we have companies complaining to us, we will advocate for them. And the Serbian authority normally listen to us. So, I repeat, I've been involved in all possible trade wars with all the countries in the world. I think here we have space for negotiating in view of this big stuff that we have in front of us, and they will understand that it's not in their interest. Yeah.
And if I may add also to what Pasquale said, on the other hand, the EU is providing a lot of support to Serbia's agricultural sector to make it more competitive, to make it more technologically advanced, and all these reforms would eventually yield fruit and bring about the stronger competitiveness of the Serbian farmers, which would hopefully result in less appetite on the government side to try to resort for different types of measures that might have a distortive effect. Please, any other questions? I've checked the YouTube channel, and if I'm not mistaken, I haven't seen any questions posted yet. So if there's anything, feel free. We don't have to stick to the topics of the panel. We can go beyond the panel. We can go and talk about any of the topics from the report if you have any questions. No? Okay. Maybe it lasted already way too long. So I would now invite you all for a quick cocktail in front of the conference room. I think a good networking opportunity. Enjoy. And thank you all for coming.